So let's get started with some introductions. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Carmel Giblin and I'm the CEO at Ethical Toy Programme. And I'm delighted today to have joined me in presenting on this topic Ines Kampfer, who is the Executive Director at CCR CSR. CCR CSR are a non-for-profit organisation based in Hong Kong, but operating, I think, pretty much globally, certainly where they're needed. So Ines will be telling us a lot more about the organisation and also sharing with us the findings from recent research that they've conducted looking at the impacts of COVID-19. And I'm also delighted that we have Matthias Forsberg from Save the Children. Matthias is based in Vietnam, and he'll actually be starting off today's webinar with an introduction to child rights and business. So let me just also take you through quickly the agenda. As I said, Matthias will start us off with an introduction to child's rights. We'll then hear from Ines about the impacts of COVID-19 for children, and also a little more about the work of CCR CSR. I'll then cover off and share with you some information about our programme and what we're doing directly at Ethical Toy Programme to ensure that children benefit from the impact of businesses and that their rights are respected. And then we'll end with just some points that hopefully inspire you to do something to help ensure our children and their rights are respected. So we'll end that off, and like I say, if we have time, we'll do some Q&A at the end. So I think the next slide just shows you some lovely pictures of the speakers. So myself, Ines, and Matthias. Matthias, unfortunately, I think his camera is not going to work for his bit of the presentation, but you all now know what he looks like, and I'll hand over to Matthias now to perhaps start with an introduction of himself and then onto his slides. Thank you, Matthias.
Yes, thank you very much. It is true my camera is not operating. On the other hand, that provides a more safer internet connection. So hopefully the sound will run a smaller risk of disruption as a result. So I'm Matthias Forsberg. I'm based in Vietnam. I work for Save the Children in the global function we have specifically for child rights and business. With most colleagues in Stockholm, but also in other parts of the world. And we do then also operate a social enterprise arm of our operations, and where we can work directly with the private sector and directly with companies. And this arm is dominated by, or our biggest operation within this is none other than CCR CSR. So through Ines and her colleagues, we have a very direct link with different sectors throughout the world. So you can move into the first slide, perhaps. I've been asked to sort of introduce broadly this. I will try to do it as quickly as possible in order to leave maximum amount of time for my friends to go into more specifics regarding the topic of today. But children and children's rights is really at the heart of sustainability. They play a critical role in all of the sustainable development goals, and not only today, but also as bearers of the future. And children are impacted by all parts of society, or children and youth. And this includes very much the private sector. And this is sort of the background to why we have sort of engaged in this agenda. Save the Children is more than 100 years old and operate in more than 120 countries. And throughout this, we strive to influence all parts of society to protect and promote children's rights. And this includes also then the role of the private sector, both in terms of corporate citizenship, taxes, etc., and laws and regulations, but also the individual responsibility and the opportunity for each and every company to actually have an impact. If you move to the next slide, I've just put some examples of the direct links that we can see between business operations and children's lives and rights. And this is both in terms of society and their impact, the way they are impacted by, for instance, household income and parents' working conditions, but also the way youth can find a future through labor work opportunities. But we also then have issues regarding child labor, for instance, or violations of youth rights and the rights for young workers. And we can just see that the child labor agenda is nowhere near to be on track to fulfill the global goal that has been set. So clearly there are changes that are needed to be accelerated. And at the bottom, you can also just see, Ines will elaborate more on this, and many of you may know, but there are a lot of indirect impacts also, not least through migrating parent workers, with children left behind or children joining and thereby being exposed to further risks. If you move to the next, I'm rushing through this now. I'm happy to elaborate afterwards in writing or in the Q&A session. But all our work is based on the Sustainable Development Goals, and the way we work with companies is based on the established framework of the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights. So there's no new process, there's no new reporting mechanism, or no new sort of separate structure for this. We can rather help to strengthen the child rights aspects of the systems that are already in place. And we've seen also in recent years the trend of moving from philanthropy to integration, a trend that is far too small and far too slow. But as regulations are starting to come in place, there's more, this trend may be strengthened and quickened as we move further. But what we also see is that global business actually need partners. We don't pretend in any way to be experts at business operations or to know that better. But we also know that we know our things better than businesses do. And by having this knowledge meet, then we can really find solutions that can fit and support each and every business. So just to round up, the basic structure of business impact, of addressing business impact on children's rights, is the Children's Rights and Business Principles. They were launched in 2012, so not far from celebrating 10 years. And they cover really the whole range of business operations, everything through supply chain issues, but also workplace issues in relation to stores or offices and other settings, but also through products, marketing and advertising, and what kind of signal in terms of society values, etc., that are brought to children through public communication and marketing. But then also the role that a business plays in the community and environment. And in some sectors, security issues are very large. In the tourism sector, environment and land acquisition, for instance, is a big part. So it really covers from A to Z, as it were, in relation to business operations. You can move to the next slide. Because this is actually what I'm talking about at the moment. So this is the basic framework. And over the last 10 years, we've been then working on developing the expertise to actually work directly with companies. And the focus biggest focus during these 10 years have been in supply chains and through building and developing the social enterprise arm of this, which enables us to work directly with companies, and this is where CCR CSR fits in, which we are very proud and happy about as Save the Children. And through them and Save the Children, we collaborate and work in numerous sectors and geographies. And one such collaboration is the one that we have with the Ethical Toy Program, which we are very happy about. And then we are also a global NGO, and we do work globally and regionally and locally to influence other actors in society in terms of laws and regulations, policies and accountability issues in relation to business operations and their impact on families and children. So it's a combination of drawing on expertise from being a global NGO and then being able to translate that and take out what's most relevant for different companies in different settings, and having built a way and set up a structure so that we are able to do so in a pragmatic and valuable way. So that's in essence sort of the background to why we are working on this, why we find it incredibly important, and how we have developed this work over the last 10 years. And Ines will go deeper into showing the concrete results that is sort of the topic of today of that effort. So with that, I say thank you and hand over.
Thank you so much, Matthias, for this introduction, and good evening, everyone. Really happy to be on this webinar with all of you and seeing all of you joining. And I think Matthias did a really good job to kind of put the background for the next couple of minutes. That I would like to share a little bit on the work that CCR CSR is doing, but more importantly, also give you an update on what we're seeing are some of those key child rights challenges during COVID-19. So very quickly, Carmel has already introduced us, but just that you also understand the link. So we are owned by Save the Children Sweden, but set up as a social enterprise with the aim to work very directly with companies within their supply chains and create a system of services that is very tailor-made to the needs of companies. As also Carmel has mentioned, you can get to the next slide, we now work all over Asia in particular. I think actually this year we'll have our first activities as well in Mexico. I think we're just going to start a new project in India in 2 weeks, but otherwise where you see the red color is where we are with staff and have our presence there and continuously work on issues. But as Carmel said, and as we are set up as a service provider for companies who want to work on their child rights impact in their supply chains, we basically go wherever there is need. Through the last 10 years that we have been doing this work, I think it kind of crystalled out those 3 areas where we feel that companies through their supply chain have an immense impact on children that can be potentially a negative one, but also creates a lot of opportunities to actually create a positive impact. Obviously, that's around child labor issues, which is normally what people think of first. We do work more in child labor issues than I honestly thought 5 years or 6 years ago when I started with this job that we would. So unfortunately, child labor is still a very important issue throughout the supply chain. And we work with, I think, around 25 companies on child labor remediation. So when they have cases within their supply chain, we support to remediate those cases, as well as creating stronger systems to prevent those cases. We work as well, and that's a really important issue from our perspective, supporting juvenile workers, because we see that there is very, very little offer for decent workplaces for juvenile workers, and as a result, they work if they drop out of school, which is very, very common, in particular around Southeast Asia, and so they do rarely find jobs that are not hazardous, and so they actually are in child labor situations as well. And last but not least, and I will talk about this in particular today, it's we know that a lot of the workers in our supply chain are migrant workers, either international migrants or domestic migrants, and this situation has a great, or like a very kind of important impact on children, whether it is that they're moving with their parents or whether it is that they're staying behind. And so that's an element that we've been looking at now for many years, and I will talk a little bit more as well in a second, and maybe some of you have heard about this as well. So we continuously trying at the moment, we're reaching out to factories, to workers, to children that we are continuously worked with or that we worked with in the past to understand what is the impact of COVID-19. If you go to the next slide, we have in the last couple of weeks, we have talked to 144 factories. We have talked to about 163 workers and 82 children. And like part of these conversations was really to understand what has changed for COVID-19 and what is the situation of the workers and the children at the moment, knowing how big the challenges are. And I will just very quickly present a few challenges now. So one is obviously, as I guess you could all guess, is the loss of income. But this loss of income is really quite sincere. I'm not going to read all through it, but on the left-hand side, you see a quote, and that's a quote of a Indonesian rattan worker who just tells us how her daily wage went from 4.7 to now $1.7 about per day, and that was just in a matter of weeks. And as you can imagine, already $4.7 is not a great amount to live on. Living from $2 is nearly impossible, and that just happened because the factories that are producing furniture had to stop production because they have no more orders, and in turn their collectors could not sell the rattan, and so they, as smallholder farmers who are collecting this rattan, have now nobody who takes the rattan anymore. And so a kind of business that I've been doing for years and does in this particular case, we also know it sustains a whole community, a whole village, just broke apart. And stories like that are multitude, and we see that even in China, we talk to workers who have a hard time to cover basic necessities, such as childcare, sufficiently nutritious food, education. And with that also, I'm not going to talk too much about child labor today, but there are a couple of signs that potentially create risks and an increase for child labor situations, at least in certain places, given that now families sometimes struggle and everyone is working, for example, if the parents lose their jobs, or they do still have their jobs but maybe only make half of the money because they work fewer hours, etc. And as such, also an increase in children leaving school. Another really big issue is childcare. Obviously, that's related, one, because the schools have been closed for such a long time, and in many parts they're still closed. In particular, kindergarten and childcare for smaller kids, that is kind of seen as not essential, so it doesn't open, creating a lot of stress for parents. And not surprisingly, particularly for female workers, who often are the ones responsible to find solutions. And we've seen children being at greater risk of being neglected, unsupervised at home. We have a lot of workers who tell her they have no other chance than to leave them at home. We know that they're bringing their children to the factories. This is not something that is reported through audit at the moment because there's not so many audits happening. However, we do have quite a few workers who told us, well, I'll just take my kid with me to the factory because I have nobody to look after. Also, in some cases, because now all the adults in the household are working in order to make ends meet. Then another key challenge that we identified is obviously the school closure, which was a challenge for every one of us who's got kids. But clearly, for the workers in our supply chain, this challenge is way more impactful and difficult to deal with. We see there is this big gap because children who have access to homeschooling, for one, if their schools are equipped enough to actually create homeschooling opportunities, but also some kids might have school who are offering homeschooling, but they do not have the sufficient internet connection or gadgets to access it. And we've talked to quite a few kids who say how hard it is to do homeschooling for hours on a little smartphone, because the smartphone is the only way they can access the internet. And so they have to do all the schooling around that. And we've also seen a greater risk of for children who were probably already kind of at risk to drop out of school and are now dropping out of school because they've not gone to school anyways for 4 months, and they so just let it be. And as such, we think there is this risk of increased juvenile workers looking for work. And as we'll also talk about, factories sometimes in need of very flexible labor because they cannot plan currently their production. They can also not, and so it is attractive for factories to have workers just coming in for a day and without a contract. And in these settings, we know that juvenile workers are often kind of an attractive workforce because they normally will not ask for a contract. They know that maybe they're under 18, so normally the factory wouldn't take them anyway, so they are ready to accept less good conditions. And so that is related to the next challenge on young worker protection, which we see is a big risk. We've seen in Vietnam, some of the young workers that we have been or are working with that either had to leave their jobs because they had to go back home to support their families, or they actually were terminated because obviously young workers tentatively have been in the factory the shortest time. And so when the factory starts to let go people, they will let go with those workers that are at the entry-level basis or at the entry-level jobs and that have only been with the factory for a short time. And as such, young workers are at a higher risk to be in the first group that is being let go. But the situation that I just talked about before of like daily laborers or getting into factories kind of informally and unofficially, we've seen is very common in Myanmar, where we've talked to a couple of young workers in the last weeks, and basically all of them are telling us that even if they're now 18, they all have started earlier, and they know anyone could tell of a range of people within their factories who's actually under 18 but comes into the factories with kind of fake IDs, but everybody kind of knows that the IDs are fake. But it's kind of accepted because also they do not get any official contracts. And so it seems kind of a short-term easy solution for factories in order to deal with the very unstable needs that they have. Just a quick note, and we can maybe go to the next slide. We have just started this week to offer what we call the Resource Hub, where we offer a bit more detailed information on the situation of COVID-19 in the different countries that we are working, and where we do have this kind of ground level information. So most of the information there is not just like a summary of media info or other, but it's actually information that we get from the factories and from the people that we have been working with or are working with at the moment to kind of reflect on what's going on the ground. Also, as we know that due to travel restrictions, etc., we seem to have much less insight on how things work. So to go talk a little bit about how we trying right now to react to these challenges, and can go in next slide. Thank you. So what we're seeing that these challenges are not only impacting the workers themselves, but they also heavily impact the factories. We have often a very distracted workforce who is at great risk of conflicts at home and in the workplace. We know that, for example, domestic violence has increased, and that's also the case in many of our supply chain countries. the managers are saying that in the short times that they're working, or with the few workers that it sometimes works, the efficiency is very low and very high rework rates at the moment. And the instability of orders, etc., leads to an increased employee turnover. They also say they lost some of their most skilled labor because there is so much fluctuation. And so generally it just creates this atmosphere of instability at the factory and at home, as it's become so hard to plan and to foresee what is going to happen. So in this context, we are working really hard to find ways to support children. Go to the next one, thank you, and their families. And so we are creating, we're working with the factories to create kind of additional support for their workers. And this ranges from childcare, just such as child-friendly spaces or family-friendly spaces, and parenting, educational support. And so we set together a kind of a range of tailor-made activities that can function and work and give the necessary support during COVID-19. To talk about these shortly, and I'm not going to go into too much detail, but just to give you a sense how we are trying to actually react to those challenges. And Carmel, you can go to the next slide. So we do kind of a quick understanding with each factory to understand what are their workers' needs, who are their workers, and then we basically decide very quickly on the suitable activities and implement those. And looking at the different kind of elements in the setting, is one set of elements is around parenting support. So we have created in the last couple of weeks and already finished, I think we're now in the second round, that we're creating a online training, parenting training, where parents can join in webinars. And we still, I think, quite impressed with our staff who managed to make these very interactive trainings, where it's not just us having a presentation, but really, as we are also normally trying to, or doing on site, creating an interactive setting where parents can really come with their key challenges that they're experiencing and talk about these and try to find solutions around these. We have adapted the topics from our normal parenting training, which is normally mostly around how to deal as a migrant workers with the challenges of often working away from home. We focus currently on dealing with stress and anxiety, and also how to help their children dealing with stress and anxiety during that time, how to best support schooling, so very practically giving parents advice, but also kind of putting in perspective so that they can find some calm about the schooling situation. We have an element on educating children around hygiene and health, general improved communication with children, also because parents now often start to spend a bit more time together during the COVID-19, due to the COVID-19 situation, and really encouraging them to make the most of the time with their children when they spend them together, or even if they are apart, to find solutions. We also working with the factories to set up family-friendly spaces, and that's where IETP has been extremely helpful. There's a lot of factories, maybe Carmel's later going to say the number, I think it's 8, that have had child-friendly spaces previously, and despite COVID-19 opening them this year, and we actually have 4 factories that have decided to open child-friendly spaces new this year, because they see so much need for it, so that although there is so much uncertainty and it's very difficult at this time to implement programs like these, they've decided they need to do that in order to, for example, prevent the neglect of children or having children on the work floor during the whole summer. We also offer financial and psychological support. So we have one-on-one, maybe, sorry, I wasn't quite, sorry, Carmel, nearly done. We have one-on-one psychological support for parents who need it. So when during the training sessions, they reach out to us, and we offer this support, as we have had very moving testimonies from parents who were saying, like, I don't know how to deal with it anymore. Like, we had a father who basically admitted that he's regularly beating up his children because he can't deal with the stress anymore, etc. And when we come across these kind of situations, we will then offer psychological support. And quite unusual for us, we do also have some small means to offer financial support to workers who are in dire need. And we are currently supporting a range of families, particular families, for example, from children who have been in child labor situations and who are in a remediation program, which is now at even greater risk because of the difficulties, or with or we had families that on top of COVID-19 had like cyclones and storms and whose houses have been destroyed. So we, when we come across those cases, we're currently offering kind of additional material support as well. We also are supporting the young workers that are in the situation or have lost their jobs. We're offering soft skills training for them, as well as additional like job placement that also applies to some of the child labor remediation kids who come towards the end of their remediation time now, and who obviously very difficult for them to now find decent work opportunities in the current context. And just to ensure also that they're not falling right back into a child labor situation, we are helping them to find other opportunities. So these are just a couple of examples. I think when I guess we'll send out the slides, we will add another slide to it that creates a little bit more information. And maybe I think I do have maybe 2 more minutes. So just quickly, this is just a couple of pictures of one of the factories, which is a member of IETP, where about 1/3 are migrant parents, and they have a lot of very young migrant parent workers. 61% of their children are under the age of 13. And they started to offer the child-friendly space already in 2018, and they have actually now also created an after-school center that is normally open from 4 to 7, but because of COVID-19 and the schools being closed, they, in collaboration with the government, decided to open the full day, and they really stepped up and allowed workers to find solutions for those workers who didn't have anyone at home who could look after the kids. And so now the center is basically not just during vacation. So I think already for 3 months it's open from 7 to 12 and from 1 to 6 or something like that. And we were just really impressed by the kind of investment and foresight of the factories, because of all, obviously economically for none of these factories, these are particularly great times. And the factory was still ready to make this investment to increase the teachers, etc., so that they could offer these longer opening times. So I think a very positive example. And if we come to the last slide, we really have from that particular example, but we've also seen this over the last couple of years, that this creates reduced stress amongst workers. It obviously is a practical solution to childcare challenges, and it obviously creates an immense positive perception and also kind of emotional tie to the factory, which we have seen that in this factory also has already in the previous years led to a reduced turnover rate and to longer retention of their workers. So there's just a couple of positive examples, knowing that honestly this COVID-19 crisis, I think, has shown a lot of the flaws of our supply chains, and there often workers have in best times been kind of at the edge of living a decent life, and I think in many cases the situation has pushed them over, and even the more so we're really hoping that we can find ways to support it, even if it's harder than it normally is, even if we know less on how tomorrow looks like, that we can make those investments to support our workers. That's it from my side. Hope I wasn't too long.
Great, thank you very much, Ines. That was really interesting, and thanks to Matthias for starting off today's webinar. I'm now going to take you through some of the work that we're doing at Ethical Toy Programme, and also just to remind you that hopefully we'll have some time for some questions. Some questions already come through, and I've got those. but please do use the chat function on the Zoom meeting feature so that you can share any questions and we can get those answered for you. So first off, for those of you who don't know the Ethical Toy Programme, I'd like just to take a moment to tell you a little bit about us. We're a not-for-profit organisation. We have more than 15 years in-field experience. So we work incredibly closely with the factories who are in our programme. Mostly we work in mainland China, but we also work in countries such as Vietnam, India, Indonesia, Mexico. A bit like CCR, basically we will go wherever our members need us to be. We exist to support business delivering on their commitments to respect workers' rights. So we are here to help businesses achieve their objectives. We do that by assessing factories' labour standards. When they need help to improve, we provide them with training so that they can understand the requests from their buyers, particularly around the standards that they should be meeting. They know what they are, they know how they benefit their own businesses in achieving those, and then they know how to sustain them. We are very focused at the Ethical Toy Programme about delivering sustainable improvements that provide long-term good employment for workers. We are all about having, like I say, a positive impact for workers. That is our core objective. So as well as ensuring the labour standards within their places of work are acceptable, we do more to provide them directly with support, the workers directly with support, through services such as our Helpline and training programmes designed to meet their personal needs. At the moment, we work with around 1,200 factories. Like I said, the majority of those will be in mainland China, but pretty much globally present now. And each year, those factories that work with us cover something like 700,000 workers. And an interesting fact that the majority of workers in toy production, certainly, but probably in most factories on the production lines, are female. So there is a big gender bias within the production facilities for women. What issues do we cover? So this slide shows you all the issues that you would expect a labour standards programme to cover. Importantly for us, and just to be very clear, child labour is a zero tolerance issue. So we do not tolerate children working in any factory in our programme, and we work very hard to ensure that that doesn't happen. When we do find issues of child labour, we are delighted to have the support of CCR CSR in understanding how we best respond to that particular child's needs to make sure that we are acting in the best interest of the child. We are obviously, although our name is Ethical Toy Programme, we actually cover more than toys. So we are a specialist programme that was created by the toy industry because the toy industry is very concerned about the impact it has and the reputation that their companies have. It is very important to the toy industry, as you would imagine, that children are respected and benefit from the industry. So that's not just about children who are the recipients of the toys that are being made, but also the children of the families who are making those toys. So our expertise, however, is transferable, and we've seen over recent years new types of industries come and work with us, including things like promotional items. Printing and packaging is a huge area of our factory universe. So much broader than toys. Just wanted to make sure that we shared that with you as well. We constantly are seeking to engage workers in our programme. We spend a lot of time in factories, and part of our time in factories, as well as doing the normal kind of auditing and assessment of standards, is to actually have discussions with workers. And more recently, we've been focusing our discussions with them around the impact COVID-19 has had on them. I am really pleased that some of this has shown, I guess, the commitment from factories and the general health of factories in our programme. So on the question of have workers had a reduction in their salary due to COVID-19, 67% actually said they hadn't. So that's really positive. But the negative side of that is that 17% of workers tell us that they can barely meet their basic living needs. And that's a significant concern for us. I guess what that shows is the fragility that many people have who are working in production roles in factories to deal with an event that is unexpected or unplanned. So into the future, as we look to the future, we are very focused on how can we build greater resilience. I know resilience is an often used term at the moment, but we want to ensure that the buyers that we work with and the factories we work with can have long-term stable futures. Because for us, a factory that is offering good employment is the greatest solution to helping workers and individuals. So we are concerned around that figure. It's not unexpected. Every business everywhere in the world has been impacted by COVID-19, and I think there is a good understanding between factories and their buyers that orders have had to be reduced because consumer demand has just fallen off. So this is not a figure that is the fault of any particular part of the supply chain, but just something that I think we all need to be aware of, and understanding what actions we can take to try to build in more certainty, more stability, and ultimately more resilience. The other question that we asked workers in our discussions with them was, how has COVID-19 actually impacted your family? And you'll see from this slide that most people are talking about the impact that it has on their family life, really, and on their children's welfare. So their children maybe are at home and they're alone while they're having to go to work. We talked about earlier, Ines talked about schools potentially being closed, so children are left at home, and that concerns parents. Huge concern is education and how their children's education has been negatively impacted by school closures. And I know parents that I've spoken to are very concerned about their own ability to homeschool or support homeschooling. So these concerns actually do impact the workplace, because as anyone who is a parent will understand, anyone with childcare responsibilities will understand, these are massive concerns for people and they will distract you. So we want to understand the concerns that workers have and then try and find ways to address them and respond to them. I want to just take a few minutes to talk you through what we do at the Ethical Toy Programme to ensure that workers' rights are respected, but actually that we do more than just labour standards auditing, but we actually go further. And by understanding workers' needs, we're able to work with our members, the companies that work with us, partners such as CCR, to ensure that we can find ways to respond that have business benefits. Whilst philanthropic acts are very important and very much valued, we do know that the best way to make programs sustainable that benefit workers is to make sure they have business benefits as well. And I think from the slides that I'll show you, you can see, or you will see, that the businesses very clearly benefit from making this investment into their workers and supporting their workers. So the first thing to share with you is our helpline. The helpline has been in existence since for more than a decade now. We were very grateful to have the support of the Walt Disney Company initially in the establishment of our helpline. But it has now been operational for more than a decade and is a critical part of our programme, hugely valued by both our factory workers, factory management, and our colleagues on the buying, from buying organisations. It is a requirement of being in the Ethical Toy Programme. So for a factory to participate in the Ethical Toy Programme, it is a requirement that they distribute these helpline cards. The ones that you'll see on your screen are in English, but they are actually in the local language when they're handed out in factories. every worker in a factory must receive one of these cards. It is something that we check for. They also, factories must display these posters in high footfall areas, so dormitories or canteens. Workers can then contact the helpline for support. The helpline is open 7 days a week, apart from national holidays, and it's open 12 hours a day, and all calls are free and confidential. Just looking at the impacts of our helpline, we've distributed nearly 1.7 million care cards since the cards were introduced. And that's been deployed across all the factories in our program, so over nearly 1,900 factories over that time. We've directly supported nearly 18,000 workers. Every call that is made to the helpline is successfully remedied and closed. So we respond to the workers directly and make sure that their query, their concern is satisfactorily resolved before we close the call. When we need to, we can involve the clients of the factory to help us escalate the case, or work directly with the factory management. I think what's been really encouraging for us is that the factory management, who maybe initially were concerned about the launch of a helpline some 10 years ago, now actually really value it. They feel it is a really effective way for workers to communicate maybe grievances they have, concerns that they may have that they're not able to articulate correctly in the workplace. And by successfully addressing the concern and fixing the issue that the worker had, it creates greater harmony in the workplace and greater trust also between management. So it's been really valued by all parts of the communities that we serve. The next area, and this is really our core area that we work with, CCR CSR. CCR have proved to be an invaluable partner for the Ethical Toy Programme. When I first met with Ines, we talked about this issue of left behind children in China. And very quickly, we wanted to work with CCR to make sure that we could do something positive to address it. So these figures will be known to you. I'm sure many of you know these figures, but just as a reminder, 88% of migrant parent workers tell us that they don't spend enough time with their children. The majority of workers at factories, certainly in mainland China, are domestic migrants. So they have moved from maybe rural towns into big manufacturing cities, places like Shenzhen, Guangzhou, in the Guangdong province. So there's a lot of people who will only get to go home and see their children maybe once a year during the Chinese New Year holidays. As I said, 63% only visit their children once or twice a year. Many of you will recognize this statistic of feeling guilty. So 84% of factory workers feel guilty about being separated from their children. They are doing it because finding good employment is in the best interest of their family and providing opportunities for their family, but they feel incredibly guilty about it. And that leads to around about 30% leaving their work in order to take care of their children. So a couple of the programs that we have developed or implemented, really, the way that we have worked with CCR is CCR are the experts in developing the right content, the right programs to meet workers' needs. And I think Ethical Toy Programme is uniquely placed to engage the factories in actually delivering these programs. We want the factories to be really committed to these programs. We want to make sure that the investment that's given to implementing these programs is really used well and sustained. So this is really important, and I think the combination of CCR and Ethical Toy working together to get the right programs to the right factories for maximum benefit has been really useful. So the migrant parent training is one such product that we have delivered to Ethical Toy Programme factories. I talk a lot about ethical toy, as you would expect. The programs that I'm covering, so migrant parent training, family-friendly spaces, after school clubs, etc., are not, you don't have to be an Ethical Toy Programme member in order to work with us to deliver these. So please feel free to get in contact to talk about how we can help you engage your factories, even if they're not within our programme. We're about making positive impact and not necessarily driving the participation in our own programme. So do get in touch if you're not in the toy industry, or indeed not already a member of the Ethical Toy Programme. So in terms of the migrant parent training, this historically has been delivered in factories with normally around 50 participants during a half-day training session. After the training, these are some of the figures that we've come up with that have been reported through the surveys. So 61% of participants thought factory management understood their challenge. And that's really important, because often, particularly if your manager isn't a parent or doesn't have any childcare responsibilities, they don't understand some of the pressures that parents may be facing. So building that understanding and helping that relationship is really important. 91% of participants saying that they trusted factory management far more. This slide just talks about the migrant parent training and the achievements. So in 2019 alone, we delivered 20 sessions, and that impacted just over 850 workers. So that was delivered to 850 workers. We have been evolving and working with CCR as they have evolved the migrant parent training product. COVID-19, we know, has significantly and negatively impacted families and their children. It is probably more important than ever to help workers maintain those family relationships at a distance when travel within, back to their hometowns is going to be even more challenging. And potentially getting workers in large groups is not possible in factories. It's been fantastic to see the migrant parent training evolve to now be available online. And these icons just show you some of the areas that it covers. So dealing with stress and anxiety, helping your children deal with stress and anxiety, and then important topics like health and hygiene, really at the forefront of people's concerns around risks of contagion from COVID-19. So great that we've now got this migrant parent training available online. We also, and Ines mentioned this before, our family-friendly spaces is a flagship program for the Ethical Toy Programme. It is one of the areas and one of the programs that I am most proud of personally. It has such a dramatic and positive impact for families, but really importantly for factory managers. And after this webinar, we'll share a report with you that talks about some of the impacts from a business perspective as well. What we have seen is it's scaling. Every year, participation in the family-friendly spaces has grown. And it's grown because from some initial funding provided largely by organisations on the buying side. So we were delighted to have support of companies like Lego, Target, and others who have helped fund factories to set up these spaces in the first year. What has happened in subsequent years is the factories continue to run them at their own cost because the business benefits are so significant. Business benefits like greater worker attraction and retention, increased quality of work, less rework, all of those things that help reduce the operating costs for businesses, which are of critical importance to companies. So how can you help and how can you support? I think the first thing that I would suggest is that you really try to understand the needs of workers in factories in your supply chain. That can be done either directly through surveys or through working through programs like ourselves or organizations like CCR. So I think it's critical to understand the needs of the workers and make sure then that the program is designed to meet those needs where possible. And not just a program that maybe has been created in isolation and not really involving the workers. It will have greater impact if it's really based on workers' needs. I think it's really important that workers have effective communication and grievance mechanisms. We've proven that the helpline is really valued and valuable. So that's something that I would encourage companies to think about. How can you ensure that workers have effective communication and grievance mechanisms? I'd also ask you, and it's a bit unusual for the ethical toy program to make such a direct plea, but we really want to deliver more online migrant parent training this year. We believe it is a critical need and will have long-term benefits for your supply chain. It's very low cost, and you will have received an email during this presentation asking you to consider sponsoring some online migrant parent training. Please consider that, and if it's at all possible, it would be incredibly well received and have an incredible impact for workers. If you're not able to, to fund activity this year, then please let us know if you're interested in supporting programs and learning more about our activities together with CCR and Save the Children in 2021 and beyond. It would be great to continue working with you. I will, that's the end of the presentations. Let me see, we're really kind of just at the top of the hour, but if anyone has any specific questions, please take yourself off mute and you can ask them now. I've got a couple of questions that I can start off with. So just one quick one. Ines, you could probably answer this quite quickly. We've had a question about CCR's work in Turkey. Do you work with a partner organisation in Turkey, or is that your own resources there?
So it depends a little bit on the project, but we do have our own staff in Turkey who is implementing projects for us and also doing the child labor remediation. We sometimes link up with some local NGOs. We're just starting on a new project in Hazelnut in Turkey, so a bit out of the scope. And there we're working with an organization called Genç Hayat. But yes, so if you need more information on that, you can just let us know.
Okay, and I know it's got my email address on the presentation, but when we follow up with the email, with the recording, the PowerPoint, etc., I'll make sure you have both Ines's and Matthias's emails as well, so that you can continue the conversations directly with those people. Can you also, sorry, Ines, this is just another kind of question relevant for you, really. In your slide, you talked about young workers being a particular concern and maybe at risk. Is there a reason why factories don't want to employ young workers who are of the legal age to work? Is there a reason why factories don't want to employ them?
Well, I mean, there's probably a twofold reason. I think for a long time, supply chain or like buyers haven't been particularly encouraging to that. Or like, because if they're juvenile workers, we have a lot of another set of protection requirements, and so we need to look into these. And so I think we've been rather discouraging it. And obviously, so it does come mostly in most countries and also by ILO with additional restrictions. So juvenile workers shouldn't work overtime, they should not work any hazardous positions, they shouldn't do night shift. So if we just look at it from that perspective, it might on a first impression seem that they're not the most attractive of workers. I think as we have seen with factories where we started to kind of shift this around, that the young workers can really be an asset. If we add on skill training, etc., they can be the next generation of multi-skilled workers. And that's how we're hoping that factories will more and more see that in the future. Just a very quick answer. I could talk much longer about that, but I know it's 10:03 here. So
exactly. So there are a couple of other questions that are probably more related to the ethical toy program. I suggest, in order to respect everyone's time, we are at the top of the hour, so we'll cover those off in the email that we send out to you afterwards. So I will close today's webinar by thanking you all for joining. It's great to have seen so many people so interested in this topic. I'd like to thank Ines and Matthias, particularly for sharing your insights and expertise, and for the work that you're doing on the ground in many locations to ensure that child rights are respected and that business can actually have a positive impact and really seize the opportunity that they have through their supply chains. I hope to all of you who joined that you found today's webinar interesting. Like I say, please check your emails and support us and the work that we're doing if you can. But mostly stay well and please stay in touch. Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Carmel.